The air in the back room of the Odessa Club was thick with the ghosts of old cigars and older secrets. It was a place of quiet handshakes and loud ultimatums. Viktor Volkov sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, a monolith in a tailored suit. His stillness was a language all its own. It spoke of coiled power, of patience that had outlasted empires and enemies. Across from him sat Alexei, the new blood. Alexei was young, with a hunger in his eyes that Viktor recognized. He had seen that same hunger in the mirror decades ago. But there was something else in the young man's gaze. A shadow. A flicker of a loyalty that did not belong to Viktor. Viktor knew exactly who had sent the boy. He had known from the moment Alexei had walked into his office a week ago, credentials impeccable, story airtight. Too airtight. Dmitry Petrov was a creature of blunt instruments, but he was not a fool. He had sent a polished stone to infiltrate Viktor's bedrock foundation. Viktor had hired him anyway. He hired him because a predictable enemy was a useful tool. And because, deep in that shadowed gaze, Viktor saw a crack. A hairline fracture of doubt. He was curious to see if it would widen or shatter. The port shipments are secure, Sergei, his loyal lieutenant of 30 years, reported from his left. Sergei was a man carved from the same harsh granite as Viktor. He did not trust Alexei. His distrust was a palpable thing, a cold spot in the warm room. Viktor gave a slow, deliberate nod. He was about to speak, to lay out the next move, to test the new blood with a simple task, when the heavy oak door creaked open. It did not swing open with the confidence of one of his men. It edged open with the terror of a mouse entering a lion's den. Two of his guards, massive men named Ivan and Boris, filled the doorway, their hands gesturing for the intruder to stay back. But she slipped past them. A girl. She could not have been more than 20. Her coat was thin, her face paler than the winter snow outside. Fear radiated from her in waves, but beneath it, there was a core of something else. Something hard and desperate. Get her out, Sergei grumbled, already rising from his chair. The girl flinched but stood her ground. Her eyes, wide and luminous, were fixed only on Viktor. Please, she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. Viktor raised a hand. Just a slight, almost imperceptible movement. Sergei froze, his body tensing with confusion and disapproval. Ivan and Boris stopped, their hands hovering uselessly in the air. The entire room fell into a deeper silence. Viktor's gaze never left the girl. He saw the worn-out soles of her shoes, the chapped skin of her hands. He saw a world of struggle in a single, trembling frame. Alexei watched, his face a mask of careful neutrality, but Viktor noted the subtle tightening of his jaw. The boy was interested. Let her speak, Viktor said. His voice was low, gravelly, a sound that had sealed fates and ended wars. The girl took a hesitant step forward. Then another. She stopped at the edge of the immense table, clutching a small, crumpled purse to her chest. They say you are the man who can do anything in this city, she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. They say you have rules. That you are fair. A dry, humorless smile touched Viktor's lips. Fair is a word for judges and storybooks. What do you want? She swallowed hard, her knuckles white on her purse. I want to hire you. Sergei made a sound, a low scoff of disbelief. Viktor silenced him with another look. He leaned forward, his heavy shoulders seeming to shrink the vast room. Hire me, he repeated, the words rolling out slowly. Do you know what my time costs, little one? No, she admitted, her gaze unwavering. But I have everything I own. She opened the clasp on her worn purse. With trembling fingers, she pulled out its contents and placed them on the polished mahogany. A few crumpled bills. Some loose change. A single, tarnished silver locket. The sum total of a life laid bare on the table of a king. It was an insult. It was a prayer. Alexei's mask finally broke. His eyes widened in shock, a flicker of something unreadable, pity, perhaps, crossing his features before being suppressed. Victor stared at the pathetic offering. He saw not the meager sum, but the sheer, unadulterated desperation behind it. This was the kind of moment that defined a man. Not the big wars, not the million-dollar deals. This quiet, impossible plea. He looked from the crumpled bills to the girl's terrified, hopeful face. And then he looked at Alexei. He saw the conflict playing out behind the young man's eyes. The world he came from, Dmitry Petrov's world, would have laughed at this girl. They would have thrown her out into the cold. Worse. Victor knew this was the perfect storm. The perfect test. A crucible for the soul he suspected might be hiding inside the traitor. What happens next is not just a story about a choice, but about the weight of every choice we make. Stay with me until the end, because the price of a soul is rarely paid in cash. This story is a testament to the fact that sometimes, the most powerful man in the room is the one who remembers what it feels like to have nothing. So do me a favor. Like this video if you believe in second chances. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that matters. And in the comments below, tell me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's get back to it. Victor leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning under his weight. He steepled his fingers, his gaze unreadable. The room was so quiet he could hear the frantic beat of the girl's heart. "Tell me your name," he commanded softly. "Lena," she breathed. "My name is Lena." "And what service, Lena, do you wish to purchase with all of this?" He gestured to the small pile on the table. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "They took my brother," she said, her voice cracking. "My little brother, Mikhail. He is only 10". Victor's face, a mask of cold control, hardened further. Children. That was the one line. The one sacred, inviolable rule in his world. Business was business. Blood was blood. But children were off limits. They were the one piece of innocence left in a city that had forgotten the meaning of the word. It was a rule his own father had beaten into him, a lesson learned in a cold, hungry orphanage where the strong preyed on the weak, but even the cruelest boys knew not to touch the smallest ones. It was a code. And a man without a code was just an animal. Who took him? Victor asked, though he already suspected the answer. There was only one man in the city foul enough to cross that line. A man, Lena whispered, her fear returning. His name is Petrov. Dmitry Petrov. The name hung in the air like poison. Sergei cursed under his breath. He looked at Victor, his expression clear. This was not their business. This was a war they did not need. Victor glanced at Alexei. The young man's face was pale. He knew Petrov. Of course, he knew him. He worked for him. This was his master she was naming. Why did he take the boy? Victor's voice was dangerously low. Our parents, they owned a small bakery, Lena explained, her words rushing out in a torrent of grief. They passed away last year. Petrov's men came by a month ago. They said we owed a protection debt. A debt from years ago. I told them we had nothing. I gave them what little we had from the shop. It was not enough. She took a shuddering breath. They came back yesterday. They said Mikhail would work off the debt. They dragged him out of our home. He was crying for me. Her composure finally broke. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. I went to the police. They took my statement. They looked afraid. They told me to go home and wait. They will do nothing. Everyone knows Petrov owns them. She was right. Petrov's corruption ran deep, a rot that had spread through the city's foundations. He dealt in the things Victor refused to touch: human misery, trafficking, the exploitation of the desperate. He was not a rival. He was a disease. Victor had built his empire on smuggling, gambling, and control. He was no saint. He had blood on his hands, enough to drown a lesser man in guilt. But it was the blood of soldiers, of men who had chosen the life. He had never, not once, profited from the suffering of the innocent. That was the difference between a king and a tyrant. He looked back at the table, at the crumpled bills and the tarnished locket. He remembered his own mother, her hands raw from scrubbing floors, saving every last kopeck to buy a piece of bread for him and his sister. He remembered the locket she wore, a cheap piece of tin that held a faded picture of a father he never knew. It was her most prized possession. She had sold it to buy him medicine when he was sick with fever. He had never forgotten that. He had spent a lifetime trying to repay a debt to a ghost. Now, another ghost was knocking at his door. Victor felt the familiar pull of the past, a cold tide rising within him. He had failed to protect his sister. She was gone, lost to the streets and the predators that roamed them, long before he had the power to save her. It was the failure that had forged him, the fire that had tempered his will into steel. He would not fail again. Not this time. He looked at Lena, and he did not see a stranger. He saw a reflection of a promise he had broken to himself. The decision was made before the thought was even fully formed. But it would not be his decision alone. He turned his gaze to Alexei. The young man was sweating, a single bead of perspiration tracing a line down his temple. He was caught. Trapped between the man who had sent him and the man who was testing him. This was no longer about port shipments or territory. This was about a code. About a line drawn in the sand. Alexei, Victor said, his voice calm and even. You are new here. You are learning our ways. Tell me. What is our protocol for this? Alexei's eyes darted to Sergei, then back to Victor. He knew the correct answer. The business answer. Sir, he began, his voice tight. Our protocol would be to decline. This is not our affair. It carries significant risk for no profit. Engaging with Petrov on this matter would be unwise. He had said the right words. The logical words. But Victor heard the hesitation. He saw the conflict raging behind the young man's eyes. The fracture was widening. Unwise, Victor repeated, tasting the word. Yes. It is very unwise. He reached out a large, calloused hand and slowly, deliberately, slid the crumpled bills, the coins, and the locket across the table toward himself. He closed his fist around the small pile of hope and desperation. Sergei, he said, not taking his eyes off Alexei. Take Lena to the kitchen. Give her some tea. Tell her we accept her payment. Sergei's jaw dropped. He opened his mouth to protest, saw the look in Victor's eyes, and shut it again. He nodded curtly, his face a thundercloud of disapproval. This way, miss, he said, his voice rough but not unkind. Lena looked at Victor, her eyes shining with disbelief and a dawning, fragile hope. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. Victor gave a slight nod as Sergei led her from the room. When the door clicked shut, he was alone with Alexei. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. You disagree with my decision, Alexei, Victor stated. It was not a question. It is not my place to disagree, sir, Alexei replied, his voice carefully neutral. But it is your place to understand, Victor countered. He opened his hand and looked at the locket resting in his palm. It was warm from the girl's fear. Petrov is a rat, Victor said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Rats chew at the foundations. They spread disease. If you let one live in your house, soon you will have 1,000. They get into the food. They bite the children. He looked up, his gaze pinning Alexei in his chair. There are two types of men in our world, boy. Wolves and rats. Wolves have a territory. They have a pack. They have rules. Rats have only hunger. They devour everything, including their own. Petrov is a rat. And we are going to burn his nest. He paused, letting the words sink in. This mission, Victor continued, his voice like ice. It is important. It is a statement. It requires a man who is smart, hungry, and understands the stakes. He leaned forward, the full weight of his presence pressing down on the young man. I am putting you in charge of the extraction. Alexei's blood ran cold. It was a test. No, it was more than a test. It was a death sentence. Or an initiation. He had been sent to gather information, to find a weakness, to pave the way for Petrov to take over Victor's empire. Now, he was being ordered to lead an assault against the very man he served. It was a brilliant, cruel, impossible choice. Betray Victor now, and his men would kill him before he left the room. Go through with it, and he would be signing Petrov's death warrant, and his own if he failed. So? Alexei stammered, his composure finally cracking. Is that a problem? Victor asked, his eyes narrowing. No. No, sir, Alexei said, straightening his back, the mask of confidence snapping back into place. It will be my honor. Good, Victor said, rising from his chair. Sergei will provide you with a team. The best. He will, I observe. To learn from your methods. Alexei understood the unspoken message. Sergei would be his shadow. His judge, jury, and executioner if he made one wrong move. I want the boy back, Victor said, his voice leaving no room for argument. I want him back before morning. And I want a message delivered to Petrov. A message he will understand. He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. Do not disappoint me, Alexei, he said without turning around. I have a great deal invested in you. The door closed, leaving Alexei alone in the suffocating silence, the weight of two worlds crashing down upon him. The planning was swift and brutal. Alexei stood before a blueprint of a warehouse district by the river, his mind racing. Sergei stood behind him, a silent, brooding statue of judgment. 6 of Victor's best men, veterans with eyes as hard as cobblestones, listened without expression. Petrov's main holding facility is here, Alexei said, his finger tapping a long, low building marked with a red circle. Warehouse 7. He keeps his high-value assets there before shipping them out. It's his fortress. He knew the layout intimately. He had been there a dozen times, taking orders from the very man he was now tasked to destroy. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. Security. Sergei's voice was a low rumble. Heavy, Alexei admitted. At least 20 guards. 10 patrolling the perimeter, 10 inside. They are loyal to him, but they are mercenaries. Their loyalty is to his money, not his cause. He had to prove himself. To Victor. To Sergei. And maybe, just maybe, to himself. A frontal assault is suicide, Alexei continued, his confidence growing as he slipped into the familiar rhythms of tactical planning. They'll see us coming a mile away. But there's a weakness. He pointed to a narrow channel on the map. The old sewer access tunnels. They run from the river right under the warehouse. The schematics show an outlet that comes up in the main storage bay's drainage system. It's a relic, sealed decades ago. Petrov won't have it guarded. He's arrogant. Sergei's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something that might have been respect. It's a long shot, the old lieutenant grunted. It's the only shot, Alexei countered. 2 men create a diversion at the main gate. Loud. Draw as many guards as possible. While they're distracted, my team and I go in through the tunnels. We get the boy. We get out. Clean and quiet. And Petrov? Sergei asked. He'll be in his office on the 2nd floor. He always is at this time of night. Counting his money. The plan hung in the air. It was audacious. It was dangerous. But it was good. Sergei stared at the map for a long moment, then looked at Alexei. The boss wants a message sent, he reminded him. The message will be delivered, Alexei said, his voice cold. Personally. An hour later, they were moving. The night was cold and damp, the air thick with the smell of the river and industry. Alexei felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. He was walking a razor's edge. One misstep and he would fall into an abyss. Yet, for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was walking in the right direction. The tunnels were as dark and foul as he had imagined. The air was thick, the only sound the drip of water and the quiet, determined footsteps of the men behind him. He thought of the girl, Lena. Her desperate eyes. He thought of her brother, a boy he had never met, trapped in Petrov's hell. He had grown up in a world like this, a world where children were currency. He had survived by becoming what they wanted him to be, ruthless, empty, loyal to nothing but his own survival. Petrov had offered him power. Victor had offered him a choice. A sudden explosion rocked the ground above them, followed by the distant chatter of gunfire. The diversion. Now, Alexei commanded, his voice a harsh whisper. They worked quickly, prying open the ancient grate. Cold warehouse air washed over them. They emerged into the cavernous storage bay, shadows among shadows. The room was filled with shipping containers. But Alexei knew what was really inside them. He could hear it. A faint, muffled sound. The sound of weeping. His blood ran cold. He had known what Petrov did, but he had never allowed himself to see it. He had kept his eyes forward, focused on the mission, on the path to power. Now, he was standing in the heart of the horror. He motioned for his team to spread out, to secure the area. He moved toward a steel container at the far end of the bay, the one he knew Petrov used for special cases. He slid the heavy bolt and pulled the door open. Inside, huddled in the darkness, was a small boy. He had his sister's eyes. "Mikhail?" Alexei asked softly. The boy flinched, scrambling back into the corner. "It's okay," Alexei said, lowering himself to one knee. "Your sister sent me. Lena. I'm here to take you home." The boy's eyes widened. "Lena," he whispered. "Yes. She's safe. And you're going to be, too." He reached out a hand. After a moment's hesitation, the boy took it. His hand was small and cold. At that moment, something inside Alexei shifted. The hairline fracture in his soul cracked wide open. The loyalty he had pledged to Petrov crumbled into dust. He had been sent here as a snake. But he would leave as a wolf. "Get him out of here," Alexei ordered one of his men. "Take him back the way we came. Sergei is waiting at the exit. Go. Now." The man nodded, scooping the boy up and disappearing back into the shadows. Alexei turned his attention to the second floor. The message still had to be delivered. He moved up the metal staircase, his weapon held ready. The sounds of the firefight outside were dying down. The diversion had worked perfectly. He kicked open the door to Petrov's office. The man was standing by the window, a phone to his ear, a look of fury on his face. He spun around, his eyes widening in shock when he saw Alexei. "You?" Petrov snarled, dropping the phone. "What is the meaning of this? I sent you to watch him, not join him." "Plans change," Alexei said, his voice flat. Petrov's two personal bodyguards moved forward, but they were too slow. Alexei's team, appearing from the hallway, disarmed them with brutal efficiency. Petrov was alone. "You're a fool, boy." Petrov spat, his bravado returning. "Do you think that old man will protect you? He'll use you and throw you away. I gave you a future." "You gave me a cage," Alexei replied, stepping closer. "You deal in cages. You put children in them. It's just business." Petrov screamed. "There are rules," Alexei said, his voice a low echo of another man's words. "And you broke them." He raised his weapon. Petrov's eyes filled with a terror Alexei had never seen before. The tyrant had become the victim. "Please," Petrov begged. "Alexei, please. We can make a deal." From the doorway behind Alexei, a voice spoke, low and heavy as a tombstone. "There are no more deals for you, Dmitri." Viktor Volkov stepped into the room, flanked by Sergei. He had not been waiting in the car. He had been there all along. Watching. Assessing. Viktor's eyes met Alexei's. There was no surprise in them. Only a quiet, solemn approval. He had passed the test. Viktor walked slowly toward Petrov, his presence sucking all the air out of the office. He stopped in front of the trembling man. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled pile of bills and a tarnished silver locket. He opened Petrov's hand and pressed the items into his palm. "This is what you are worth," Viktor said, his voice a death knell. "A girl's last hope. You tried to extinguish it. For that, there is no forgiveness." He turned his back on Petrov and looked at Alexei. "The boy is safe. The nest is empty. The business of this night is almost concluded." He nodded to Sergei. "Clean the house," Viktor ordered. "Burn the rot out." Sergei nodded, a grim smile on his face. Viktor put a heavy hand on Alexei's shoulder. "Come, boy. A promise must be kept." The ride back was silent. The city lights blurred past the armored windows of the car. Mikhail, wrapped in a heavy blanket, was asleep in the seat between Alexei and Viktor. The boy looked peaceful, the terror of the last day temporarily banished by the innocence of sleep. Alexei stared at his own hands. They felt different. They had followed orders before, done terrible things for men like Petrov. But tonight, they had done something else. They had opened a cage. They arrived at a small, unassuming apartment building in a quiet part of the city. A safe house. Lena was waiting inside, pacing the floor like a caged animal. When they walked in, her eyes flew to her brother. "Mikhail," she cried, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. She ran to him, gathering him up in her arms as he woke. She buried her face in his hair, her body shaking with sobs. Viktor and Alexei stood back, watching the reunion. It was a scene of such raw, simple love that it felt sacred, out of place in their violent world. Viktor felt the old ache in his chest, the ghost of a memory of his own sister. He pushed it down. After a few moments, Lena looked up, her face streaked with tears of gratitude. She looked from Viktor to Alexei, her gaze settling on the younger man who had carried her brother out of the darkness. How can I ever repay you?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. Alexei looked at Viktor, unsure of what to say. Viktor gave a slight nod. This was Alexei's moment. "There is no payment needed," Alexei said, his voice softer than he had ever heard it. "The debt is cleared." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled bills and the locket, which Viktor had silently passed to him in the car. He held them out to her. "This is yours," he said. It was more than enough. Lena looked at the offering, then back at him, confusion in her eyes. "I don't understand," she said. "You gave us something worth more than money," Alexei explained, the words feeling foreign but true on his tongue. "You reminded us what is worth fighting for." Lena stared at him, at his hard eyes and the weapon still holstered at his side. She saw the conflict, the darkness and the light warring within him. Are you a good man?" she asked, the question innocent and profound. Alexei was silent for a long moment. He thought of the things he had done, the life he had led. He glanced at Viktor, who stood impassively by the door, a silent observer of this final test. "I am what I need to be," Alexei answered, his voice quiet but firm. "Tonight, you gave me the chance to be a good man. It was the right answer. The only answer." Viktor stepped forward. He took a simple black card from his jacket and handed it to Lena. It had only a phone number on it. No name, no company. "You and your brother will be safe now," Viktor said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "A new apartment has been arranged for you. Far from here. The bakery has been restored. It is yours again. If anyone ever troubles you again, you call this number. Anyone. He looked down at the boy, who was now peering out from behind his sister's legs. "You are under my protection now," Victor said. It was not a promise. It was a statement of fact. A law of nature in this city. With a final nod, Victor turned and left. Alexei followed him, casting one last look back at the girl and her brother, a small island of light in his world of shadows. Back in the car, Victor was silent for several long minutes. Finally, he spoke. "I knew, from the first day," he said, looking straight ahead. "I knew Petrov sent you." Alexei's heart hammered in his chest, but he did not deny it. The time for lies was over. "Why?" Alexei asked. "Why did you hire me?" "Because Petrov picks his tools for their sharpness, not their strength of character," Victor replied. "He saw a weapon. I saw a man. I wanted to see which one you would choose to be when it mattered." "I could have betrayed you," Alexei said. "You could have," Victor agreed. "But you did not. You stood in the heart of the rot and chose to burn it down. That is a loyalty that cannot be bought. It must be forged." He finally turned to look at Alexei, his eyes clear and direct. "Petrov offered you a future. I am offering you a place. A pack. The choice is still yours." Alexei looked out at the passing city, a concrete jungle of wolves and rats. He had been a scavenger for so long, living off the scraps of other men's wars. Tonight, he had found a pack. "I know where I belong," Alexei said. And for the first time, it was the absolute truth. Years passed. The city changed, but the currents of power beneath its surface remained the same. Viktor Volkov grew older, the lines on his face deepening like cracks in ancient stone. He moved slower, but his presence had lost none of its weight. If anything, it had grown heavier, more profound. Alexei was no longer the new blood. He was Victor's right hand, his chosen successor. He had earned his place not through fear, but through a fierce and unwavering loyalty. He had taken Sergei's place when the old wolf had finally retired to a quiet fishing village by the sea. Alexei now stood where Sergei once stood, a guardian at the gate, a man who understood the code down to his bones. Victor's office, once a place of tension and testing for Alexei, had become a sanctuary. It was a quiet space above the noise of the city. On his vast, immaculate mahogany desk, among the papers and the expensive pens, sat a small, simple object. A cheap, clear plastic box. Inside it, resting on a bed of black velvet, were a few crumpled, faded bills and a tarnished silver locket. It was Victor's most valuable possession. Visitors sometimes asked about it, their curiosity piqued by the strange memento in a room otherwise devoid of personal effects. Victor never explained. He would simply look at it, a flicker of something unreadable in his old eyes, and change the subject. But Alexei knew what it meant. It was a reminder. It was a touchstone. It was proof that even in the darkest corners of the world, a single, desperate light could shine through. It was a lesson in the true nature of power. For in a world built on fear and greed, true strength is not the ability to take, but the will to protect. True wealth is not measured in gold, but in the promises you keep. And sometimes, the most important choice a man can make is not to save himself, but to answer the prayer of a stranger, and in doing so, find his own redemption.